Hello and welcome to this management case study PreScene Analysis video for the May and August 2022 exam sitting. And in this PreScene Analysis video series, we'll be going through the PreScene company Pipe-In. And before we get into the introductions of this PreScene and who I am, just one thing to point out regarding the PreScene is the COVID-19 statement at the beginning. Please bear in mind that you're expected to assume that the COVID-19 pandemic has not had an impact on the PreScene company. So just bear that in mind when forming your answers. Now before we go any further, I feel an introduction is in order. My name is Jordan and I work on the content creation team at Astranti. Now part of my role is to prepare materials for the MCS exam. This will include our PreScene Analysis series of videos, the production of our industry analysis of the PreScene company, and I'm also heavily involved in the writing of the mocks that we produce for the MCS exam. Besides the case study itself, I am also one of the CIMA tutors here at Astranti, where I produce a range of content from the objective test mocks through to the study text and learning videos. Now, how does this video series work? Well, we'll start by going through the PreScene section by section, breaking it down as we go along. We will only cover a couple of pages in the PreScene each video so that you can pace yourself through the document. First, we're going to be looking at the key points of the PreScene analysis. Now, this will include the operations of the PreScene company, so if to manufacture its manufacturing process, for example, how it serves its customers, who are its customers, and what its financial position and performance is, as well as its organizational structure, to name but a few of these key points that we're going to be looking at. Alongside this, we're going to be looking at providing a wider industry analysis and show you how this relates to our PreScene company. And for the industry analysis more specifically, we have a separate video that covers the finer points of the wider industry in more detail. Now, it is important that in your exam you demonstrate your industry knowledge and awareness when answering your questions, as that is what the examiners are also looking for alongside your ability to answer the question. To aid our analysis, we'll also be using some business models that seem relevant. So for example, we may use PESTLE, SWOT, or Porter's 5 Forces to give some generic analysis of the business. Now, perhaps the most important part of this video series is to raise the most likely exam issues from the PreScene document. So this analysis is designed to refine your knowledge of the PreScene company and the wider industry, but we also want to connect this information to the relevant topics that you have learned in your CIMA studies and these topics that you will obviously be examined on. And to supplement this, I may give some exam hints or tips that are based on past experience on how CIMA have assessed certain topics in the past. Once we've covered the PreScene analysis, we'll move on to the strategic analysis. Now in this video, we use something called the rational planning model. Now don't worry if you haven't heard of it before, it is generally something that is introduced at the higher levels of the CIMA qualification. Nevertheless, it is a very useful tool for us to use when conducting a strategic analysis of our PreScene company. Now, using the strategic analysis, we can attempt to figure out what the current position of the company is, where it plans to go, and how it intends to get there. So the purpose of this in the exam is so that you have a broader understanding of what the PreScene company's strategic goals are, which will allow you to frame your answers in a way that makes strategic sense for the company. And lastly, we will round off this video series with a top 10 issues video. Now, this might seem self-explanatory, but it's basically me going through and picking out the top 10 issues that I think are relevant to this PreScene company. And we do this because there's a lot of material to cover at this level of the qualification, so we hope this top 10 video will help direct your revision and narrow your focus on the theory that is most important for this PreScene company. As for how this analysis specifically works, again, I'll be going through the PreScene section by section, but I'll also be assuming there is no prior knowledge of the PreScene. So we will be building up our knowledge of the PreScene together, starting from 0, working all the way up to 100. Obviously, if you have already read the PreScene, then you may need to be patient for the first couple videos as we build up our knowledge of the PreScene company. And we recommend that you are active in your learning and that you take notes of the PreScene alongside our analysis. So you could read the section of the PreScene covered in the video prior to watching it so that you can compare your notes to ours. Now, this will mean that you may have some different points. Maybe you will find issues that are not addressed in the video itself, but that is completely fine. That is the whole point of this process. The point is that together, we can try and identify as many points as possible and help substantiate your own analysis of the pre-scene. Then once we've finished our pre-scene analysis, as already mentioned, we will go through the full strategic analysis and the top 10 issues. Just to finish off then with some notes to consider on the pre-scene itself. For starters, the pre-scene is released by CIMA to give you context on the pre-scene company you are going to be examined on. So CIMA's aim is to test the content of the pre-scene in the exam. This means we can make some educated guesses about what may come up in the exam. Emphasis on the may, there's no guarantee. So the inclusion of particular items within the pre-scene could indicate that CIMA intends to actually test you on that particular bit of content in the exam, and I'll do my best to point out these to you as we go through the pre-scene. However, I will say this, and I urge that you take this to heart. Do not pre-write anything based on the pre-scene alone. This is because in the exam, you will be given a range of scenarios that you will have to respond to specifically. These unseen scenarios will include information that is not in the pre-scene. So if you go into the exam with a pre-written answer based solely on the pre-scene, you are likely to end up writing answers that do not answer the question posed in the exam. And if you do not answer the question, you will not be rewarded for your efforts. Instead, you should use the content that we're providing here to give you a background on the various topics to make it easier for you to adapt and respond to the unseen issues more effectively. So as some final points, do use the pre-scene and make recommendations that are consistent with your analysis, but make sure you answer the question and make sure you address the unseen issues in the question directly and organically. Right, so with the introductions out of the way, if we go down to the next page, we have, of course, our table of contents. And so for this video, what we're going to do is cover the introduction and then the tea industry, all the way up to growing and processing tea leaves. Because we're dealing with, as we'll see in a second, a tea manufacturer. So I figured that let's start by just introducing who we are, the tea industry as far as growing the tea goes, and then when we come back in the second video, we'll be looking at tea manufacturing and piping as a business itself. So starting off, our first little bit of information in the pre-scene we have is the introduction. And this introduction is actually quite important as it gives some key contextual information about who piping are, what their situation is in the country they operate in, what their position is as a company, and more importantly, what your role in the business is. Now, this is generally always the same from case study to case study to case study, but it's nonetheless important, especially for those of you who are gateway students and you're doing your case study for the first time. The role you play as a case study student in the exam is very important to how you structure and write your answers. But before I get ahead of myself then, our first paragraph concerns piping as a business, and we can see that it's a quoted company. Now that little bit of information is actually quite important because in saying it's a quoted company, we know that the business will have different forms of equity finance available to it. So you're not going to get questions, crucially, on the consequences of becoming an IPO because the business is already quoted on the Northlandian Public Stock Exchange. So you can rule out questions on an IPO, but you still need to consider the various ways in which equity finance can be raised for a quoted company. And then, of course, there's the different characteristics of debt and equity finance. If you've got a business decision to be made and you have the choice of using debt, equity, or a combination of the two, having knowledge of those two topics and the characteristics of them, and of course how they relate to the business as a quoted company, will be important. The second sentence then also gives us a little bit of detail about how piping operates, and we can see that piping buys tea that uses in bulk on the open market. So obviously we can talk about bulk discounting. Now, having said that, bulk discounting isn't something that's covered at MCS level, but it's worth just acknowledging the fact that we're buying large quantities of material as part of this business, and that is going to come in with questions like cost management and how does the business manage its material inputs as part of its value chain and those sorts of topics. But that's just sort of a little window into what we might expect as we go through the pre-scene. The second paragraph then concerns Northlandia as a location. So, for example, we've got the fact that it's a developed country, it has a strong economy, citizens have a high standard of living. So given that we're dealing with tea, which is a luxury product, you can expect that the demand determinants are going to be surrounding things like disposable income, culture, for example, as tea is a cultural commodity as well. And so what you might expect with this kind of information is to consider the business environment, so your PESTLE analysis, and to consider the political, environmental, economic, etc. Those factors are important when it comes to analysing the business environment of a country. The reason you might want to take note of that is that if not Frinter, that's the previous precinct company. If piping were to expand abroad, then what you need to be considerate of is the business environment they're moving into. So if Norlandia is a strong economy and has a high standard of living, what does the country that it's expanding to have as far as standard of living goes? What are the consequences of that to the business, as it's currently operating in one that is a strong economy with a high standard of living? So those sorts of comparisons. Other thing is the currency. Now, what is really important here is just bear in mind what the currency is, which is N dollars. I say that because while you won't lose marks in the exam if you don't get this right, it shows your technical accuracy if when you're referring to the financials of this company, you refer to it in the correct currency denomination, which is N dollars. If you don't, like I said, you won't lose marks, but it doesn't look terribly good on you as well, because bear in mind, you are role-playing as a financial manager, which we'll get to in a second, and for that reason, you need to show your technical accuracy as you're technically presenting a report to your manager, and your manager wouldn't like to see technical inaccuracies in the report. So that's how you've got to perceive yourself in this exam. And then finally, we have that this company is going to be compliant with international financial reporting standards. So if you're familiar with other financial reporting standards like GAAP, bear in mind that that is not what's going to be assessed here. You need to have confidence in your understanding of IFRS specifically and not in other reporting standards. So that's the 3 contextual paragraphs that you might find useful, some information there. The thing then with this last paragraph is the role that you'll be playing. So you are the financial manager at Piping's head office. Your key responsibilities associate with management accounting, and you report to Chana De Silva, the senior financial manager. So for context, we have our chief executive at the top, then we have the finance director below them, then the person you respond to is Chana De Silva, who's the senior financial manager, and then you are the financial manager. You're there to implement senior management decisions and provide advice when requested. So if you're asked to explain something, if you're asked to give a recommendation, even though it's not something that you'll be asked commonly to do because recommendations and evaluation is generally a strategic skill, you can be requested by your senior manager who might be looking for your opinion on something. So just bear that in mind, that as the financial manager, you're crucially there to receive instruction from a senior financial manager, and based on what they ask you to do, you provide advice, you explain certain processes to them, and you maybe explain the consequences or give your opinions if requested to. As a point of order when it comes to the exam, we have seen examiner reports specify that when students fail to achieve the higher level bands in their answers, it's because they are describing or they're listing their answer rather than providing advice or in-depth explanations, which is what you need at the MCS level. Now, before we get on to the industry, there are of course the 5 core activities just worth briefly covering. Those 5 core activities are equally weighted in terms of their importance, but just bear in mind that the weightings will vary. In other words, A might only be worth 17% of the exam, whereas D might be worth, say, the full 25%. I digress, not quite important here for the PreScene analysis, but what to bear in mind is the topic areas. So in our assessment, we believe that topics concerning the A core activity can cover pretty much P2, E2, and F2, whereas D is more or less exclusively P2 and F2, for example. So that's just something to bear in mind when it comes to your revision, a little bit of an assistance there when it comes to revising and understanding what it is you need to learn. Right, so that's the nitty-gritty about this little topic out of the way. Let's actually look at the tea industry, as this is where the PreScene really starts. So starting off, we're giving a little bit of technical insight as to what tea actually is. So tea is the process of soaking dried leaves called Camellia sinensis in boiling water. And we're told in the second paragraph that while you get many drinks that are called tea, strictly speaking, It's only tea when the leaves that are put in boiling water are from the Camellia sinensis family of plants. Now, this might seem rather arbitrary as far as information goes, but there is maybe 1 or 2 points worth pulling out. So because Camellia sinensis is required for the production of what we call tea, like proper tea in the case of this PreScene, then there obviously comes that little bit of risk, isn't it? You've got one raw material that is responsible for producing the end product. So what happens if there's a bad season? We're dealing with agriculture here. Agriculture relies on many chaotic elements like weather and soil quality in order for crops to grow at the correct yield. And so if some of those things are not ideal in a particular year, we can get a bad harvest. That can cause supply chain issues. So from a manufacturing perspective, because remember we are manufacturing this, we may have to explain ways of managing these risks. One way of which I've mentioned here could be through the use of scenario planning, for example. As for the actual growing and processing of tea leaves, we can see here that the shrub is grown in South Asia and East Africa primarily, and it's done at altitudes of 1,000 to 2,000 meters. So because we're dealing with altitudes of 1,000, 2,000 meters and from South Asian and East African countries, there are of course some supply chain logistics to be conscious of, how these could affect the cost of the tea leaf when it comes to purchasing it from for the manufacturer, as any kind of complication in the acquisition of these crops is going to drive up the production cost. Then, because we're dealing with South Asian and East African countries where these crops are farmed, there's of course the risk of exploited workers. And for that reason, we have to consider ethical sourcing from these countries. It's a big issue in the tea and coffee industry for that matter, as they are dealing with crops that can only be farmed in very specific conditions, but are in countries that don't have strong worker protection laws. And this is quite important in the tea industry because there are companies like Tetley and Twinings that do market their tea as ethically sourced. You know, they use fair trade or rainforest certified teas. And if these sources aren't ethically, well, if these teas aren't ethically sourced, then that can obviously damage the brand and the perception of the brand when it comes to customers. So in terms of this exam, where that is probably the most relevant is with integrated reporting capitals. So the environmental reporting capitals, as we're dealing with environmental resources, but then also the social capital, so how the supply chain is treating workers at the other end, is piping supporting the use of, say, slave labor in the tea industry. How does that affect the brand's perception? Those sorts of things. Now, as for some details on the plant itself, we know that the plantations have a useful life of around 40 to 100 years, depending on the variety of the shrub that's being used, and that the workers have to manually pluck these leaves every 7 to 14 days. And then they're produced into 2 main types of tea. Before we get onto that though, something I just want to bring up is not entirely relevant to the MCS exam, but I figured may as well raise it, is that in the International Financial Reporting Standards, when it comes to non-current assets, remember there is the use of agricultural and biological assets. It's not relevant to the CIMA exam, or it's not part of the CIMA syllabus, but I figured it's worth mentioning just to remember that there are ways in which we can account for biological assets when it comes to agriculture. Now, as for the types of tea that can be produced, we have 2 that are brought up here. So we have black tea and we have green tea. Now, to summarize it, both teas have different processing methods. With black tea, the leaves are spread on racks, they're dried and they're treated, they're left to absorb oxygen in the dry air, whereas green tea is made by steaming and heating the leaves after they've been plucked. So there's a different production or processing process to these different teas. Now, we haven't been told how this will affect the cost of the tea itself, but what it does tell us is that there are different ways of producing it. And from piping's perspective, because there are different methods involved, it could result in, if they wanted to say manufacture or sell green tea rather, then there are different production costs that are going to be associated with green tea compared to black tea. And in the exam, crucially, that might mean you get given unseen material that details this information. Things like the production costs of these teas, and then your job might be to explain the cost implications of it, how you would manage the costs, etc. So that is sort of what you might get when it comes to this information. It's a little bit tenuous, but it is there for a reason. That is possibly one of them. Then further down, what we've got here is some further information about the processing. So we can see here that the leaves are bagged and sold to the manufacturers directly. So the processing I just mentioned above is done by the farmers rather than the manufacturers. At least that's the implication being shown here. And we're told that black tea is a bulk commodity. So the only way to buy it is in bulk, as it's implied at the beginning, because we're told that Piping purchases its tea in bulk. And crucially, what we've got here is that this is done through what are called tea auctions. Now, the thing with these auctions is that essentially you've got all these different manufacturers competing with each other for different black tea leaves from different plantations. We're told here that the flavour of the tea leaf can be affected by where the leaf is actually grown, what plantation it's grown on. So for a company like Piping, it might have a couple of plantations which it principally buys its tea from, because those plantations provide the leaves that give Piping the taste that they are looking for. Now, what can that do to the price of tea? Well, we've actually got a graph down here. We can see that over time, the price of tea has been on a fairly steady decline, actually, for the last few years. So obviously, from Piping's perspective, this is actually quite good, because it means they can buy the tea leaves without spending as much on them. But from the farmer's perspective, well, this has to be absorbed somewhere. So question is it maybe that there's a lot of buyer power? The tea manufacturers have a lot of power over the price that is set, and so they can dictate that to the auctioneers. Perhaps there is just simply a lot of tea. You know, we're getting really good harvests, and as a result, this is increasing the supply of tea leaves, but the demand is not as high as the supply. So you're getting this downward trend in the price of tea as well. It's gone down from what was a high of about, what's that, about 2.75 N dollars per kilo, and it's now gone down to about 1.6-ish N dollars per kilo, right about here. So naturally, what you might expect then is that there is perhaps maybe some buyer power when it comes to this, maybe higher supply when it comes to the tea leaves. So what does this mean for the exam? Well, there is a topic in the exam to do with the value chain. You might have to perform a value chain analysis, and in Porter's value chain, there is something called procurement. So if you're asked in the exam to explain the various aspects of the value chain for perhaps the introduction of green tea to the business or some other element, then you might refer to this stage of the production process, of the value creation, because here procurement have to acquire the leaves at a price that is going to be beneficial to the business. They're not going to want to buy tea that is too expensive, but they also need to buy tea that satisfies the business's requirements, which is it needs to taste a particular way. So that is where procurement may have some relevance with respect to this information. So we've come to the end of this little section of the video. So we're just going to list off a few key topics that I think, or maybe not key topics, maybe possible topics that have the chance to appear in the exam. So some of these are ones that I've already mentioned as well. So obviously we've got risk management, that's like dealing with price, seasonal variations due to crop yield. That also feeds into cost planning. How does the business effectively plan for its production costs to make sure that it earns its target profit margins? Then there's, of course, integrated reporting, which is the principal topic in NF2, where you're probably dealing with things like the social responsibility of the business, and of course the value chain, which of course requires the inputs of the business to produce a profit margin, and how this stage of the value chain, so primarily to do with inbound logistics, but more probably to do with procurement with the actual purchase of the leaves, that can be an important topic as well. Or at least this subject of the pre-scene might feed into an answer you give on the value chain, rather than this be exclusively on the value chain. And so, as some examples, it's like, what are the risks of, right? Risks of the seasonal variation, or what are the risks associated with the price of tea increasing in a uncontrollable manner? How is the value chain affected by, how is the value chain affected by the introduction of green tea to piping's products, all right? What capitals are affected by or impacted by a decision for maybe piping to side with a particular auction, or to purchase from a particular plantation? And if that plantation maybe has a not so good reputation. All hypothetical topics, yes, but ones that I feel that are worth sort of just speculating on. Okay, there's no harm in speculating the various ways in which information in this pre-scene not only can be used to ask questions, but how it can be used to answer questions as well. So to finally wrap up this video, just do a very quick pest analysis of the the growing and processing environment of the tea industry. So when it comes to the purchase of tea from South Asia and East Africa, what do we need to consider from a business environmental perspective? Well, for one, there are of course tariffs that could be in place that will of course increase the production cost, or potentially decrease the production cost of tea. That also goes the same for exchange rates, how that might play a part in the actual cost of these manufacturers, because at the end of the day, these manufacturers are more than likely not going to be domestic to where the tea is grown. They're importing it rather from these countries. There are of course the working conditions as well. We have to be mindful of what the working conditions are of these farmers and how that may affect inevitably the capitals of the business if we get an IR question. What I haven't mentioned here, what's not mentioned in the pre-scene at the moment so far, is also farming technology, how that might play a part in reducing the production costs. Perhaps what we're seeing here is the price of tea going down because it's becoming more efficient maybe to produce tea using various machinery. So maybe the costs are being absorbed in the sense that less time is being spent actually producing tea. Worker rights as well, from a legal perspective, where the different plantations are operating, what are the worker rights there, as that might dictate as well the kinds of suppliers that these tea manufacturers inevitably partner with when it comes to purchasing tea, or where they bid, I should say, rather. And then, of course, environmental impacts as well include things like water usage and deforestation when it comes to the production of tea. Right, and that brings me to the end of this part of the PreScene analysis, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you in the next part. Now, while I've got your attention at the end of this video, I'd like to make you aware of the other products that Astranti sell as part of the case study course. So the first of these is a series of study text and tuition videos, and these come in two flavors. You have our written study text if you prefer learning through reading, or you can watch our videos if you're more of a visual learner. Now to start with, we have an exam technique study series, which breaks down how to succeed at various case study levels. We'll be looking at exam technique, writing style, and planning that you need to nail to be successful in your case study exams. And to accompany this, we also have a revision series dedicated to the theory side of things. This is because at the case study level, there is a large amount of theory you need to be capable of using in your case study exam. So what we've done here is we've taken the key areas of the theory from the 3 case study levels and condensed them into a series of chapters to help focus your revision. Moving away from the more generic products and onto the products that are specific to the case study pre-scene, the first of these is the PreScene Analysis video series. First and foremost, this contains a series of videos where we break down the relevant pre-scene at the appropriate level of the qualification, page by page. And throughout this video, we bring out all the key points that could be relevant for you in your exam, looking at various topics and things you might need to consider when revising for the case study. And then to supplement the pre-scene analysis, we also have 2 videos. We have the strategic analysis where we give a broad overview of what kind of strategy the pre-scene company is using and where it might be going in the future. And then we also look at the top 10 issues that we think this pre-scene company might be subject to and something that you may need to take into consideration when revising for the case study. We then provide an industry analysis document and accompanying video. CIMA like to see you demonstrate wider industry knowledge in your exam, and this is what this industry analysis does, as it gives you the wider industry knowledge you need in order to fulfill this requirement. Essentially what it is, it's a large document that we've compiled on all the relevant industry information that we have gathered so that you don't have to do the revision yourself. And then to accompany this, we of course have a video that goes over this document to pick out some of the key points for you if you prefer that. We also produce a number of mock exams for every sit-in. We write 5 mock exams for the first exam sit-in, and then we add 2 more supplementary mocks for the second exam sit-in. We design these mocks around the specific issues relevant to the pre-scene and make them as close to the real thing as you will see in the case study exam as possible. So these are a great way to practice your exam technique and test your knowledge of the pre-scene company under timed conditions. And then to add value to this product, we also offer a marking and feedback service. So we have a range of highly skilled finance professionals working as freelance staff for us, and it is these staff that provide the marking and feedback service. So this is a great service to use in conjunction with our mock exams, as it gives you a great idea of how you're progressing in the areas you need to work on for your case study exam. And then if you're in need of extra exam practice, we also provide a more generic question pack product. So obviously there are only so many questions you could write about on a specific pre-scene. So what this question pack is a series of generic questions on generic scenarios that we come up with at Astranti, whereby we look to test specific topics that come up regularly in the case study exam. So if there is a particular topic you are struggling with and we've only tested once in our mocks, and you'd like more practice on it, then these question packs will be a great product for you to turn to. The penultimate product on this list is a product for those of you who would like to get a full overriding picture in terms of your revision all at once, and these are our masterclasses. So these are our expert tutors who hold 2 masterclasses every exam sit-in, and these essentially cover all key aspects that you're going to need to know for your relevant exams. So from particular theories to analyses of the pre-scene, all the way through to tips and tricks you can use in your exam. And finally, such is the confidence we have in the quality of our product that if you do purchase a full course from us and you unfortunately do not pass your exam using our product, then we will offer what we call a pass guarantee. So if you did not pass your exam after purchasing our full course, then you will receive the materials for the next exam sit-in free of charge. Okay, thank you very much for listening to that. I hope you find our products useful, and of course I would like to wish you the best of luck in your exam from everyone at Astranti. And if you want to follow us and get in contact with us concerning the case study or any other matter, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.